If your manager signs one of his old players to be a cornerstone at a club, there's a 90% chance it ends in disaster. This is the essence of the Paul Konchesky theorem, a law of football that warns us of the perils of misplaced loyalty. When a manager leaves a relatively smaller club behind and tries to recreate the same environment by bringing along a familiar face, it almost always backfires spectacularly. No example embodies this better than Paul Konchesky's ill-fated spell at Liverpool. In the summer of 2010, Roy Hodgson arrived at Liverpool after taking Fulham to the Europa League final. Convinced that hard-working, dependable Konchesky could fill the left-back role in a side that was supposed to challenge for trophies, Hodgson spent £2.5 million to reunite with his old stalwart. Almost immediately, the transfer became a symbol of everything wrong with Hodgson's tenure. Konchesky was slow, nervy and uncomfortable on the ball in a team that demanded composure and ambition. He struggled with the weight of expectation at a club of Liverpool's stature, routinely making errors that led to goals. When fans voiced their frustrations, things escalated off the pitch. Konchesky's mother famously posted rants on Facebook, insulting Liverpool supporters and further souring an already toxic atmosphere. Within months, Hodgson was sacked and Konchesky was loaned out to Nottingham Forest, never to play for Liverpool again. This episode is why the theorem bears Konchesky's name. It perfectly encapsulates how managers often overestimate the value of familiarity, believing that a player's loyalty and understanding of their methods will translate seamlessly to a grander stage. Instead, the player is swallowed by the pressure and becomes a lightning rod for criticism. The Paul Konchesky theorem is not merely about one failed transfer, but about the hubris that blinds managers to the reality that big clubs require big personalities and elite ability. The allure of signing a trusted lieutenant is easy to understand. Managers think a familiar player will help implement their tactics faster, set an example in the dressing room, and serve as a link to past success. Yet, time again, the pattern repeats. What worked in a smaller, less demanding environment collapses under brighter lights. The Konchesky case proved that when you try to replicate Fulham in Liverpool, the contrast is rather stark, and the supporters will not tolerate mediocrity. This theorem has played out elsewhere, which is what we are also going to explore in this video. The Paul Konchesky theorem is a cautionary tale. Loyalty is admirable, but in football's harshest environments, sentiment rarely survives contact with reality. And no matter how fondly a manager remembers past glories, sometimes the best thing he can do is leave the old players behind. So, let's talk about the Paul Konchesky theorem as a whole. Paul Konchesky was a professional footballer who, for much of his career, proved himself a perfectly competent left-back. He came through Charlton Athletics Academy and broke into their first team as a teenager, earning a reputation as a steady, hard-working defender with a good left foot. Over the years, he played in the Premier League for West Ham United, where he scored in the 2006 FA Cup final, and later joining Fulham, where he enjoyed arguably the best spell of his career. At Craven Cottage, Konchesky thrived under Roy Hodgson, playing a crucial role in Fulham's remarkable run to the 2010 Europa League final. In that environment, surrounded by a well-drilled defensive system and relatively modest expectations, Konchesky looked solid and reliable. Never spectacular, but rarely a liability. Everything changed when Hodgson was appointed Liverpool manager in the summer of 2010. Faced with limited funds and desperate to impose some familiarity, Hodgson turned to one of his trusted Fulham lieutenants, Konchesky arrived at Anfield for £2.5 million on deadline day, intended to become Liverpool's starting left-back. It quickly became clear that he was completely unsuited to the demands of such a massive club. At Liverpool, Konchesky looked overwhelmed almost immediately. Where Fulham's tactical setup protected him with deep defensive lines and less expectation to contribute creatively, Liverpool expected their fullbacks to combine composure on the ball, intelligent overlapping runs and confidence in possession. Konchesky struggled in every department. His distribution was poor, he seemed hesitant whenever pressed, and his defensive position was regularly exposed. In a team already underperforming, Konchesky became a symbol of lowered standards. Fans grew increasingly frustrated, and the situation deteriorated off the pitch when his mother posted a notorious rant on Facebook, labelling Liverpool supporters "Scouse scum" and mocking them as uneducated. Even though Konchesky himself hadn't said anything, the damage was done. The episode crystallised how disconnected he and Hodgson were from the club's culture and expectations. The episode was short, but unforgettable. Konchesky lasted barely half a season before Hodgson was sacked in January 2011. New manager Kenny Dalglish wasted no time in moving him out on loan to Nottingham Forest. He never played another competitive game for Liverpool. For many supporters, including myself, his name remains shorthand for that grim period in the club's modern history, where standards slipped and the club looked unrecognisable. This is why Paul Konchesky is the perfect poster boy for the theorem that bears his name. He was not an inherently terrible footballer, he was competent and, at Fulham, even dependable. But his transfer to Liverpool illustrated how quickly competence can unravel when a player is plucked from a smaller, more forgiving environment and thrust into the spotlight of a giant club, all because a manager clings to familiarity. In that sense, Konchesky's story is more than just a failed transfer. It stands as a reminder that football at the highest level has no room for sentimentality or nostalgia. When the pressure mounts and expectations rise, reputations built elsewhere can crumble in an instant. For Liverpool, Konchesky became a cautionary symbol of a club losing sight of its ambitions. For managers everywhere, he remains the clearest proof that loyalty and comfort are no substitutes for genuine quality. Marouane Fellaini was never supposed to be the marquee signing of Manchester United's post-Ferguson era. When David Moyes replaced Sir Alex Ferguson in the summer of 2013, he had visions of bringing in top-class midfield reinforcements. Thiago Alcantara was heavily linked, and Cesc Fabregas was pursued for weeks. Yet, by the time the window slammed shut, United had failed spectacularly to land any of their prime targets. Instead, Moyes fell back on the one player he knew he could trust, Marouane Fellaini, the towering Belgian who had become his battering ram in midfield at Everton. For Moyes, Fellaini was familiar and reliable. At Everton, he was an awkward but effective presence, dominating aerial duels, scoring goals from deep and unsettling defenders with his elbows and his enormous frame. Under Moyes, he'd been used as a box-to-box midfielder and even as a makeshift forward. That versatility suited Everton's pragmatic approach, but what worked in a team punching above his weight would prove disastrously ill-suited to a club of United's stature. The deadline day deal cost United £27.5 million, and even that was botched. Fellaini's buyout clause had expired weeks earlier, forcing United to pay more than they would have if they'd acted sooner. The saga became a symbol of chaos and indecision, eroding confidence in the club's leadership before Fellaini had even kicked a ball. Once he did take the field, the limitations were quickly exposed. United were accustomed to technical midfielders like Paul Scholes and Michael Carrick, players who could dictate tempo with their passing. Fellaini was a completely different type. Clumsy on the ball, slow on the turn, and reliant on physicality rather than finesse. He didn't look like a player meant to carry the midfield of England's biggest club. He looked like an Everton workhorse, parachuted into a role far beyond his skill set. Fans were immediately sceptical, and Fellaini never shook the perception that he was Moyes' safety blanket. While Moyes had intended to rebuild United with elite signings, he ended up starting his reign with a player who embodied the caution and limited ambition of the manager's own style. Each time Fellaini started, it reinforced the sense that United had abandoned their identity in favour of route-run pragmatism. On the pitch, he offered little to challenge that view. Injuries didn't help, but even when fit, he struggled to impose himself. His first season produced no Premier League goals, and performances were defined more by fouls and misplaced passes than any positive contribution. By the time Moyes was sacked in April 2014, Fellaini had become the face of that doomed regime. This is why Marouane Fellaini fits the Paul Konchesky theorem so perfectly. He was not a bad footballer. I still remember him, a fantastic footballer for a team like Everton. And as such, in a smaller pond, he could be dominant. But the move to Manchester United under a manager who leaned on him out of familiarity rather than suitability exposed every flaw. Fellaini became a reminder that trust and comfort between a player and a manager can never replace genuine quality and the ability to rise to a higher standard. He was a great player, signed for the wrong reasons at the wrong club, and asked to fill shoes far too big for him. Now we're going to go a little bit further back in time to find another example of a transfer that perfectly illustrates the Paul Konchesky theorem. This time, it takes us to the early noughties when Tottenham Hotspur were desperate to rebuild, and Glenn Hoddle believed he could accelerate that process by bringing in a defender he trusted completely. That player was Dean Richards, who had established himself as a reliable and commanding centre-back at Southampton under Hoddle's management. At Southampton, Richards was widely respected. He was strong in the air, composed on the ball, and confident enough to lead a defence without any fuss or ego. For a club of Southampton's size, he was a true cornerstone, dependable, honest, and professional in every sense. Hoddle admired his character and consistency so much that when he left the South Coast to take over at Tottenham in 2001, he identified Richards as the man to anchor Spurs' defence and help transform them into a more resilient top half side. The move happened quickly and at great expense. In September 2001, Tottenham paid a little over £8 million for Richards, a huge sum for a defender at the time and a club record fee. It was an unmistakable statement that Hoddle trusted Richards above any other. But this is exactly where the Konchesky theorem comes into play. The qualities that make a man invaluable at a smaller club can look alarmingly ordinary when transplanted into a bigger arena with higher expectations. Richards made his debut in a dramatic 5-3 loss to Manchester United, a match that seemed almost symbolic. Spurs were capable of moments of brilliance, but at their core, the defensive frailty remained. Richards was thrown straight into the cauldron, expected to steady a backline that was neither settled nor especially talented around him. While he had performed admirably in Southampton's relatively low-pressure environment, he quickly discovered that every mistake at Tottenham was magnified. Over the next 2 seasons, Richards struggled to live up to the record fee. He was never a flashy player, and at Spurs, that lack of aura made the investment look questionable almost immediately. Injuries repeatedly sent him back, preventing him from ever building the rhythm and momentum a defender needs to thrive. But in truth, Dean Richards was far more than just a transfer fee or a headline about underperformance. He was a footballer who carried himself with dignity and humility. Those who watched him closely at Southampton and Wolves before that remember a centre-half who gave everything to the shirt. Richards tragically passed away in 2011, far too young, and in the years since, the tributes from teammates, coaches and supporters have only underlined the respect he earned throughout his career. That's why Dean Richards belongs among the most striking examples of the Konchesky theorem. Not because he was a failure, but because he was a good man and a good professional caught in a move that asked too much. Sometimes, even the most committed players cannot overcome the burden of expectations and circumstance. His story is a reminder that behind every transfer label lies a human being who loved the game and gave it his all. Irrespective of him being placed in a theorem like this, he was a fantastic professional footballer. One I do remember fondly as I began to develop a love for football, even at the young age of 7. To understand the many ways of the Paul Konchesky theory can play out, it helps to look not only at the biggest clubs, but also at those moments when a manager's loyalty to a trusted player shapes the fate of a new team. One of the clearest examples of this dynamic happened when Roy Keane signed Carlos Edwards for a second time. Carlos Edwards was a winger whose career had been defined by hard work, pace and commitment. He first came to prominence at Wrexham, then climbed the leagues before catching Roy Keane's eye at Luton Town. In January 2007, when Keane was building a squad at Sunderland capable of promotion from the Championship, he signed Edwards to inject energy and directness on the right flank. The move paid off immediately. Edwards played a big part in Sunderland's surge to the title, scoring important goals and becoming a fan favourite for his relentless running and determination. For a time, it seemed as if Edwards had found the perfect manager to bring out the best in him. Keane trusted him implicitly. Edwards respected Keane's demanding standards and no-nonsense approach. They were a natural fit at Sunderland. But like so many relationships built on familiarity, the dynamic changed when circumstances changed. When Keane left Sunderland and later took over Ipswich Town, he once again turned to Edwards, signing him permanently in 2009 after initially bringing him in on loan. In theory, it made sense. Ipswich needed leadership and experience, and Keane needed players he believed he could rely on to set the tone. But the move exposed the risks of trying to recreate old success in a new environment. At Sunderland, Edwards had been surrounded by a squad full of ambition and momentum. Ipswich, in contrast, were stagnating in the Championship. While he remained an honest professional, Edwards struggled to recapture the same spark that had lit up the Stadium of Light. The goals dried up, the influence waned, and Ipswich's inconsistency became a running theme of Keane's tenure. The decision to lean so heavily on familiar faces began to look more like nostalgia than strategy. Edwards still contributed moments of quality. He was too capable and too committed not to, but he never quite became the cornerstone Keane needed him to be. Supporters began to question whether the manager was simply trying to build Sunderland all over again, rather than adapting to Ipswich's unique challenges. While this story differs slightly from more high-profile examples, because Ipswich at the time were a step down in status rather than a leap forward, it shows the same principles at work. The temptation for managers to fill their squads with players they trust, believing past relationships will guarantee future success. In the end, that faith rarely produces the same magic twice. Carlos Edwards remains remembered fondly by fans who saw him at his best, especially Sunderland fans who watched him drive the team forward on their promotion run. But when the move to Ipswich failed to reignite his peak form, it highlighted why this pattern so often ends in disappointment. He was not a bad signing, nor an unprofessional one. Just another player asked to recreate something special in the wrong circumstances. This is why he, 2 fits in the Konchesky theorem. A good footballer who followed a manager out of mutual trust, only to find that trust alone can't always rewrite the story. And there you have it. What ties together the stories of Paul Konchesky, Marouane Fellaini, Dean Richards and Carlos Edwards is a simple but powerful truth. When a manager signs a player they know well, someone they've trusted and relied upon at a previous club, there is an overwhelming chance it won't work out as hoped. This is the essence of the Paul Konchesky theorem. Konchesky himself is the poster boy of this phenomenon. At Fulham and West Ham, he was solid, a reliable left-back. But when Roy Hodgson brought him to Liverpool, expecting him to be the cornerstone, the fit was disastrously wrong. The Premier League's biggest stage exposed its limitations, and the signing quickly became a cautionary tale about comfort over quality. Marouane Fellaini's move to Manchester United under David Moyes followed a similar script. Familiar, trusted and reliable at Everton, Fellaini was brought in as a key figure in Moyes' grand plans. Yet, the gulf between Moyes' vision and reality was stark. Fellaini's game, built on physicality and directness, never meshed with United's demands of technical precision and creativity, making him a symbol of failed ambition and misjudgment. Dean Richards' story echoes this pattern in the early noughties. A commanding presence at Southampton, he was Glenn Hoddle's trusted defensive rock. When Hoddle brought him to Tottenham, the jump to a bigger club magnified every shortcoming. Despite his professionalism and undeniable quality, Richards struggled under the weight of expectation and pressure, showing how even good players can falter when placed in the wrong environment by a manager's misplaced faith. Carlos Edwards' case adds nuance to the theorem. He was a hard-working and effective winger who thrived under Roy Keane at Sunderland, but when Keane brought him again to Ipswich Town, the magic didn't follow. Though Ipswich was a smaller club, the dynamic of trust without context remained the same. Past performance and loyalty didn't guarantee future success. Each of these players was far from failures in the broader sense. They were professionals, talented and respected in their own right. Yet, when uprooted and brought into bigger or different challenges purely because of a manager's comfort and familiarity, their careers took a different trajectory. The theorem is not about condemning these players, but about highlighting a managerial pitfall: reliance on known quantities over objectively right fits. And still, despite all the great players highlighted here, Edwards, Richards, Fellaini, Konchesky still gives me nightmares. If you enjoyed this theorem video, be sure to check out my playlist on some other theorems that I've made in the past, and also gives you a chance to see any future ones. So, as always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.